I'm deathly afraid of aging. I'm in my 20s and I think about it on a daily basis. Mostly at nights when the thoughts come creeping in. Oh my god, I'm getting so old. I'm wasting my life. I don't know what I'm doing. Everything is passing by me with the speed of light. It might just be a tad obsessive, but how can I not be afraid? I didn't have the nicest childhood. My youth was pretty shitty. And my 20s also mostly suck. So when I hide in my bed on a Friday night to, tune out the week and get some good entertainment, the Netflix sound plops up and I turn on a movie. And so many times it's about young people, teenagers in the lead role, having the times of their lives. And while it's nice to watch, I can't relate. And a lot of the times I also can't relate to the people in their 20s, the way that they are being presented. I'm truly convinced that I have not reached my full potential yet. But how am I able to think that way? When every piece of media tells us basically the same story, our youth is the most brilliant, glittering time in our lives. Nothing that comes after really matters. For a long time, I thought that my fear of aging meant that I was shallow and maybe I am, maybe that's also part of it, but I realized that a huge chunk of it comes from grief. People tend to talk about youth with so much nostalgia, and I do hold some of those feelings as well when I look back at my younger years. But so much of it for me was about survival. And when I look on a screen and see all the characters as, punchlines, burns, cautionary tales, or as grieving, depressed side characters, it's no wonder that we get installed these feelings. The fear of growing older, the nostalgia, growing into someone who has already bypassed all of their best years. How can I look forward to getting older? What happens when Hollywood convinces you your life is over before it even began? I recently watched The Book Club and the Thursday Murder Club, and oh my, I love those movies. It was so good to see people above the age of like 30 having a good time, living a life that doesn't revolve around grief and regret. I do obviously also love a coming of age story, but I realize that sometimes I love a piece of media that gives me a good representation of what it might feel like to grow older, of aging. One that seems real and might make me a little bit less afraid. I recently also watched a movie which displayed the story of 17-year-old girls and their journey with falling in love. And while it was cute and was nice to watch, I almost felt, this might sound stupid, but I almost felt a little bit too old for it. But I know that young protagonists embody feelings that most of us chase. First experiences, freedom, relevance, and beauty. That's what we often associate with youth, And on the complete opposite end, age so often gets stereotyped with, decline, irrelevance, weakness, and loss. And it's so awful that we try to stay away, as far away as possible from the topic, like it's not going to happen to all of us. When it comes to media, it's almost like aging is seen as an afterthought, the sad end after a brilliant youth. You pass your prime and then that's it. You get to sit out the last sad years in silence and suffering. Hollywood really seems to love stories which focus on the journey where characters, become someone, but truly struggles with stories about staying someone over time. I know that we all want escapist media, but maybe if we had more representation, we'd all have a little bit of a different outlook on life and everything that it entails. But obviously, youth is so wonderful to sell. Youth culture drives fashion, beauty trends, social media trends, celebrity culture, and advertising. And right now, at this point in my life, I hate it. I'm really sick of it. There are industries built around our beauty standards, the ideals that we are chasing. It seems like, aging is one of the biggest crimes a woman can commit. Wrinkles, gray hair, a body that's not as fit as it used to be. Jail time, immediately. Cuff me up. Goodbye. Bye-bye. I see kids in my TikTok feed who are already obsessively using retinoids and sunscreen. I mean, sunscreen is a good thing, but retinoids. And they haven't even reached puberty yet. Everyone with Botox, everyone with filler, women in their 30s getting ready to get a freaking facelift. Circling back to the whole movie topic, there's one study which showed that in 2023, only three films featured a woman over the age of 45 as a lead or co-lead, compared to 32 films with men in the same age group. I'm sorry, but that's insane to me. So, do we need good role models? Do we even need good representation in media? I mean, of course. Of course, it's so important to have people to look up to, a piece of media which can give you hope. I know it's a bit of a different topic, but still so relevant. The videos where the little girls or boys get their first look at Halle Bailey as Ariel are burned in my mind as being such a good example why media is so important when it comes to us being influenced. Hollywood plays such a huge role when it comes to our attention, which characters and stories we pay attention to. So what happens when we consume something and these questions, who do we look at? Who gets the screen time? Doesn't provide any productive sources for us to connect with. When media fails to provide older role models, aging begins to feel less like a natural progression of life and more like social disappearance. Youth becomes associated with relevance, while aging becomes associated with relevance. We lose access to something that's so essential. Proof that life continues to have depth, meaning, sensuality, creativity, and transformation beyond youth. Older generations carry so much lived generation that younger generations simply haven't had time to acquire. Their stories so often, contain resilience, grief, political memory, survival, reinvention, and long-term understanding of human relationships. So, isn't growing old a beautiful sign of survival? Isn't it actually such a huge gift? An evidence of survival. But everything always seems to be about beginnings and so little about continuation. And maybe that's one of the real dangers of ageism. It teaches people that aging isn't about becoming, but about disappearing. I'm fairly certain that life is an endless journey of reinventing yourself, going through different chapters, hardships, and journeys, finding new pieces of yourself and letting go of other ones. Life is difficult at 5, at 15, at 30, and at 80, for all the different reasons. When I was 18, I thought that by the age of 30, I'd have it all figured out. I'd be living in a big, beautiful house, married and with children. I thought that I would have it all figured out. I think I had a pretty simple outlook on, what being an adult would entail. But maybe it was also hope, because in the media that I enjoyed at the time, this is what I saw. People in their 20s living better than they did in their teens. Because now you have a job, you have money, you have friends, and you have love. And I am most definitely lacking in all of these things. But that's what I saw, so that's what I hoped for. Now that I know that being in my 20s has been a little bit of a disappointment, I go searching for books, for shows, for movies, which might display a realistic version of what it feels like to grow older, to get maybe a little bit of hope that your 20s are supposed to be this way and that age will bring some relief. I get hit with even more disappointment and regret, and I am really sick of it. The media presents us with the fact that your teens, your 20s, that's the big party, and everything after is just a big, ugly hangover. But what if my childhood, my teenage years, and my 20s already felt like the dreadful morning after an awful party? Am I just gonna fade into sad oblivion because I didn't have those magical years? Why can't I have my happy coming of age story at 40, at 60? Will everything I do be irrelevant after the age of 30 because now I have expired? I think that when you become an adult, you do change a lot, because I am fairly certain that, you might actually make some of the most dramatic shifts when you've been an adult for a little while, because this is a time where you realize what it actually means to be a grown human in this world. It's not just all about who am I gonna become? The big question. Who am I gonna be? But so many more questions. Who did I become? Was I happy? Did I use my time wisely? You already have topics to look back on, time to reflect on. And sometimes it is deeply devastating. I have some extremely haunting mistakes that I made, which will stay with me for the rest of my life. But you can take those things, those realizations, and grow with them. Make better or, even worse choices. So you've already confronted reality a lot. So that's what I want to see. People in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, going and living their life, being someone and having fun, living a life that's not just about loss and regret and grief. It's so nice to think about the fact that the first season of Sex and the City aired when the characters were, in their early 30s or, a little bit older. And we get to see them explore friendship, love, and their struggles up to, their 50s or even older. I want to see more female friendships, like in Mamma Mia, where they support each other and have the time of their lives. I think one of the things that scares me most about aging, circling back to the beginning of the video, is the fact that most of the time when I consume some kind of media, whether it's books, shows, or movies with older people, it's always so closely tied to regret. The mother who's overwhelmed and regrets her children because she spent all of her life dedicating herself to raising them, and now hates herself and her life because she forgot all about herself in the process. Or the other one who's so deeply depressed because she didn't take all the chances that were handed to her. And yes, I know that when it comes to living a life, regret will always be there. It doesn't matter whether you are 12 or 82. There are so many choices you have to make, and it's not always the right one. That's just part of it. But one thing that truly drives me crazy and really shakes me up a bit, it seems like every older person in media is just drenched in regret. They hate their life so much, and in my mind, this equals aging means regret. Only that and nothing else. It's not just part of the story, it is the whole story. And now that you are old, you can't do anything about it. You can't change your life because you're not young anymore. So you're just stuck in this terrible state of mind that will haunt you until you will pass away. That's what media taught me, and I think it's honestly part of, why I'm so deathly afraid of it. And I know it's not smart to base all of my knowledge on media, but hey, it's such a huge part of our lives. We get told, your youth is the best time of your life. High school is supposed to be a glittering, hormone-dripped dream, being surrounded by fun and friends, flirting, and Friday nights filled with parties. And my Friday nights at 17 were spent with hot chocolate in front of Tumblr. And as a 20-something, there's nothing really that fun for me to look back on. I obviously still have some good memories that I'm extremely grateful for, but I struggled a lot and my home life really sucked. And my 20s so far consisted of COVID and crisis, no money, and honestly kind of the same feelings I had as a 17-year-old, but just with more responsibilities and paperwork, which makes me cry. But right now, isn't this supposed to be the time of my life? I should be wild, going out and making the memories, which should fill me up so much that it'll last until old age. Young characters always get written as exciting and filled with endless possibilities, and older ones are always filled with, reflection. And if you grow up consuming this again and again, this kind of dread creeps up on you more and more, that this is the only time that matters. Aging is written as something that comes with expansion, also a time where you can reinvent yourself, make bold decisions, explore new hobbies, fall in love again, or move across the country and start completely new. No, when you're old, it's always about the trauma of the past. Where did the time go? You'll have less freedom, less relevance, less beauty, and less meaning. You'll stop being a character and start becoming a therapy lesson on two legs. Media doesn't just entertain us, it shapes us. Teaches us so much about which lives deserve attention and which don't, in the eyes of Hollywood. Especially as women, we get bombarded with beauty standards and the creeping reminder that we become less worthy with age. And I really don't want to pay attention to those ideas anymore. I don't want to be afraid of growing old. Yes, I will probably always fear death, but I want to embrace the gift of aging. I think it's a beautiful thing and one that so many people don't get to live out. So it's a shame that we only view youth as something worthy, the beginning and the end of everything. Yes, youth is meaningful and it can also be a beautiful thing, but it's such a short chapter that also holds so many difficulties. I had no idea who I was at 14 or at 20. Most of the time, I was just, role playing as the person I thought that I wanted to be. Now I've grown a little bit more comfortable in my own skin. I don't always love myself, but I've started to accept myself. And I don't want to fight myself anymore like I did with all my teenage power back in the day. That's something that I'm extremely grateful for, becoming a bit older, but also growing more comfortable in my own skin. And I really hope that that's how it's going to continue for me, exploring myself and going through all of the ups and downs of life and learning more and more about this beautiful world and my own soul. No matter how different we are to each other, we are all moving in the direction of growing older. We can't hide from it. So let's stop seeing getting older as something niche, but as the most universal experience there is. And maybe Hollywood will always stay the same. Maybe they will always cling to the same old topics and obsessions. But maybe we can also see that as a gift. We don't stop becoming people when we get older, but we stop being watched so closely. And maybe that's where we can find a different horizon of freedom.